Hello everyone and welcome back to the Belgian Beer Brothers channel. My name is Cedric and today we're gonna talk about Oude Geuze, Oud Beersel. This is the 7th episode in our series about the Toer de Geuze 2022, and today we're talking about a brewery that I personally love very much because they're quite innovative, and it's a brewery again with a history. It started out in 1882 when Henry van der Velde worked as a seasonal worker at the brewery De Kroon, and he really caught the brewing microbe, and he wanted to start his own brewery, or blendery actually. So he buys a farm and he starts his own blendery. Back then just called Van der Velde, not Oud Beersel yet. And several years later, his son Pierre takes over. Pierre was his youngest son. He takes over the brewery, and apparently something went wrong. And in 1947, after the Second World War, Pierre stopped all activities. Now, in the meantime, Henrique's oldest son, Egidius, and his wife inherit the farm of his wife's parents, and Egidius immediately repurposes it as his own brewery, as often happened back in that time. So Henry's son Egidius started his own brewery, and that's the one that would later turn out to be Oud Beersel. That was in 1922, but in 1934 Egidius also renovated the stables into an inn called het Bierhuis, or the House of Beer, and later on that was exploited by their daughter Marie-Thérèse. That name will come back. She exploited that inn actually until 1988, so pretty long. Problem: shortly before World War II, he starts brewing lambic himself in a brew house built from second-hand parts. Until then, they were actually a blendery, not a brewery, as often happened. So he started brewing for himself, and during World War II, the Germans prohibited the use of wheat for brewing. There was a wheat shortage, and wheat could only be used for baking and for food preparation, not for brewing. So they had to turn to another produce, and they started brewing with fermented sugar beets. Now, later on, we learned that Egidius snuck in some wheat behind the Germans' backs in order to keep making good beer. Then in 1953, unfortunately, Egidius died at a young age. He was only in his 50s, I believe. And his son Henry, named after his father, Henricus, who studied at the INIF, and I'm gonna have to cheat to say this right, the Institut National des Industries Fermentation, or the National Institute for Fermentation Industry, or Industrial Fermentation. And he took over the blendery brewery in that time and immediately expanded it to a capacity of 50 hectoliters, whereas it used to be 15. So immediately more than tripling the capacity of the brew house. And he changed the name into Oud Beersel, because Beersel was the town that they were in. So that was in 1953. Then basically all went well for several decades, but in 1991 Henry's son Hubert didn't show any interest in taking over the brewery, and basically the brewery went to his cousin Danny Draps, and Danny Draps was the son of Marie-Thérèse, of who we talked earlier, sister of Egidius. There were some problems with that takeover, or after that takeover, because Henry hadn't invested in the brewery for years and years. For example, in 1991, they still worked with a bottling installation dating back to 1938, and in 1996 it broke down and they had to call in the help of brewery Bohn to bottle their beers, and a lot happened in that time. So yeah, the brewery was severely outdated and almost fell apart. So in 2002, more than 10 years later, Danny decided to sell everything, the brewery, the bar, and yeah, the brewery became an empty warehouse and the bar was turned into a flower shop. Fortunately, because Oud Beersel was it had a certain heritage and was of certain importance to the town. A big fan, Gert Christiaans, and his mate Roland de Bus heard about the discontinuation, and they decided to save the brewery. They didn't really have a plan how to save the brewery, but they wanted to do it, so they came up with a plan. And in 2003 they went to Ghent to start learning brewing and malting, and they started up a company basically, but they didn't have the funds back in the day. So around 2005, I believe, after learning how to brew, they made their own recipe, and that recipe became the Bersalis Triple, which is still in production today. And back then, in I believe around 2005, they brewed that at brewery Geuze, known for Delirium Tremens and a whole bunch of other beers. And they sold that to fund their takeover, or their acquisition rather, of the brewery Oud Beersel. And it worked. Honestly, I love the Bersalis Triple. I have it in my fridge right now. We might be talking about that later on. So in March 2007, Oude Geuze and Oude Kriek, Oud Beersel, were back on the market. They became available again. Unfortunately, in April, so 1 month after the commercialization of the beers, Roland had to quit because he couldn't combine it with his day job. He had too much work, he was too busy. So Gert was alone again, and his dad Jos took over Roland's place. And then, yeah, it was a roller coaster. The brewery just exploded after that, in a good way, no worries. But investments were made almost on a yearly basis. So, for example, in 2010, they placed 4 oak foeders, large wooden 40 to 45 hectoliter vessels, and later on those would become 13 foeders. They even had to raise the roof to put them in the brewery, which they happily did, of course. And in 2010 as well, they could hire their first employee, which is a major milestone for every company. Then in 2017, they opened their own orchard, not a vineyard, but a cherry orchard, breeding Schaarbeekse krieken to make that very special, very specific sort of kriek. And in 2018, they conquered a tiny part of the market with an innovation called beer in a box. And beer in a box was actually bagged beer in a cardboard box with the tiny tap on it, like we know the cardboard boxes of wine. They did that with lambic, and I have tasted it. It's awesome. Of course, a big plus to this product is that if you open a bottle of lambic, you have to empty it, because it will go bad. If you open a box of lambic, a 5-liter box, you can keep it for 10 days, 12 days, because the tap closes it all off. It seals the beer from air, and it's only one way. So, lovely. Just put it in the fridge, take it out tomorrow or the day after, nothing has happened. Also in 2018, they received their first batch of oak barrels, and there were whiskey barrels, Madeira barrels, Porto barrels. They experimented a lot with that. And at the same time, at the ground floor, they put in 2 new stainless steel tanks of 24 hectoliters to replace the old tanks, mainly to macerate cherries or other fruits with their lambic, to make the fruit lambics. Then in 2019, only 1 year later, they put in 10 extra tanks of 10 hectoliters each for lambic infusions, and again 4 40 hectoliter tanks, the huge steel tanks. Also in 2018, so as you can see, it was investment after investment after investment after investment. They built a brand new bottling line. Up until then, I believe everything they made was being bottled at Boom or at other breweries, and now they had the chance to bottle their own beers in-house again. Now, I visited the brewery about 2 weeks ago, and it's still the tiny brewery. So everywhere you can see there's racks of empty bottles and boxes of bottled beer, and I believe the next investment will be a new warehouse. And in 2022, so early this year, they reopened Oud Beersel, the beer house. They restored it, let's say for 75%, to its original appeal. And it's a very cozy bar where you can have a drink and then have a talk. Yeah, it's restored to what it used to be 100 years ago. Currently, they've expanded so much that they are brewing not 50 or 250 hectoliters anymore. They are brewing 1,000 hectoliters now, and 50% of that is lambic. Or at least 10 years ago they were brewing 1,000 hectoliters. Now they're brewing even more. And I once read that Frank Bon, the Pope of Geuze himself, said about Oud Beersel, well, he said a lot about Oud Beersel, but he said that they have a very green taste because of the use of lactic acids in the beer, or not the use, the presence of lactic acids in the beer, and the use of nearly fresh hops, which is rather special for lambic or Geuze, because normally you use year-old hops or dated hops, mainly because the bitterness is gone after a year. So these guys use fresher hops, and apparently, yeah, you can taste it. So let's try that out. You will see that I ditched my Toer de Geuze glass today, and I have this fancy schmancy glass here, and that's because this is an Oud Beersel tasting glass for the fancy beers. One big plus of this glass is that it's not a 25 or a 33 centiliter, but it's an 18 centiliter glass, which means that I can drink not 2 but 3 of these today. I know it's smaller, it's still 37.5, but it's a thought that counts, right? They have their lovely own printed muselet. Another blank cork. Ooh, there she goes. A bit of activity in the bottle, not much, but as I heard the pop when I uncorked it, I believe we will see some activity when I start pouring. There we go. Look at that. A lovely, very clear Geuze. Beautiful, very white foam, tiny bubbles, very dense foam, very thick foam. You can even hear the carbonation. It's a bit lighter than we're used to. It's more to the orangey golden straw color. When I opened the bottle, some more sweet bitter aroma was the first thing I smelled. And now I can smell the tartness, maybe the wood in the beer. But it still has a bitter feel in the nose. So I believe that might be what Frank Boon meant when he said it has a green taste or a green aroma. Love this glass, by the way. First taste, I immediately taste what he meant with the green. It has a tartness, some sourness in it, but it's more of a green apple-like acidity with a sweet edge. It's tart, but it's not sour. It's not aggressive. And it has that lovely roundness, a lot of bitterness in there. And this is the first Geuze that I taste with this amount of bitterness in it. And I must say that I do not dislike it. I actually even like it very much. This is a very round, full-bodied beer. I mean, actually, I can't say full-bodied. It's a very full-tasting beer. But when it comes to mouthfeel, it's a rather thin, fresh, refreshing mouthfeel. We still have that nice 3 or 4 millimeters of foam there on the edge. Okay. The aftertaste isn't very long lasting, which is for a Geuze also a special feature. Yeah, I must say, for a regular Old Geuze, nothing special, because they make a lot of special beers as well, by the way. Like their Bersalis Triple Oak Aged and their Green Walnut. They have a beer called Oude Beersel, Old Pipes. I believe I have that one in my cellar as well. We might be talking about that one too. Yeah, it's rather special. The aftertaste is very fresh, very, dare I say, hoppy, a bit bitter and sour. Not like in other beers where you have some sweet and sour or sweet and bitter. This is bitter and sour, and it's, for me, a rather unique combination, a rather unique taste. So yeah, I think this is one of the most well-balanced Geuzes that I already had. But that might be because I like some special beers. Okay, you guys, I'm gonna leave it at that, and I am gonna edit this video so it reaches you guys in time, because I'm recording this very late on the day. What can I say? If you like this, let me know, like and comment. If you want to see more, if you want to see the last 3 videos in this Toer de Geuze series, subscribe, hit the bell icon so you get notified. If you're curious as to what I'm gonna unbox or talk about next week, yeah, same story. Subscribe and you'll find out. Cheers, you guys.